to a brand new episode of Coming Distractions brought to you by the Nerdpocalypse podcast. All right, guys, let's talk about the 2019 Hellboy reboot. This one is starring David Harbour, Milla Jovovich, Ian McShane, Daniel Day Kim, and Sasha Lane. So this was originally supposed to be the third movie in the Hellboy franchise, originally done by Guillermo del Toro, but eventually it ended up becoming a reboot, and this one is directed by Neil Marshall, who's probably most famous for doing The Descent, which was a horror movie. He's probably in that right world for what they went after in this. So the general story here is, back during King Arthur's time, there was this Blood Queen, played by Milla Jovovich, who was plotting to release this massive plague across the world and allow monsters from hell to take over the world and killing every man, woman, and child on Earth. Because she's obviously a horrible person, King Arthur feels the need to lop her head off with Excalibur and cut up her body and throw it into boxes and spread her body all across England so that she can't be put back together, because even cutting up her body doesn't kill her. So flash forward to present day, and we see Hellboy, who at this point is already kind of active in the world. He works for BPRD, the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense. And he goes down to Mexico to search for one of his colleagues. Things pop off, and then he finds out about this sort of prophecy of this Blood Queen, and then we get moving throughout the story. Along the way, he meets some of his characters like Daniel Day Kim and Sasha Lane, who kind of sort of join him on this adventure to stop the Blood Queen, who eventually gets put back together and wants to do the same thing she wanted to do in the beginning, which is, destroy the world. Look, the movie, a couple of things. I'll start with the good, and then I'll move into the bad. The good, the action sequences overall are pretty fun. Look, I'm a fan of gore. Like, I like that in movies, if that's what the movie is trying to do and it's being honest about it. The gore worked for me. It is over the top, but again, it's gore. It's supposed to be over the top. There's a couple of action sequences, like when if you saw the trailer, where he's fighting three giants. It's a pretty fun scene. It's not taken particularly all that serious. They're like literally knocking him like through trees and like through a forest, and it's weird and it's brutal, and the kills are really satisfying, if that makes sense. The world in and of itself is bizarre and strange and dark, and it feels more like 1980s dark, creepy, Dark Crystal kind of world, which is in the same kind of sphere that I thought the Del Toro movies were living in as well. So if you like that sort of atmosphere with a much larger amount of brutality, that part is going to work for you. I thought Ian McShane and David Harbour were good. Like, they were fine. They were totally serviceable in this movie. I didn't feel like the script was that great. Some of the lines feel a little clunky. I actually like Harbour's portrayal of Hellboy. He had a little bit more, like, they dealt a little bit more with his sort of humanity, as it were, than they ever did with Ron Perlman's. I mean, obviously that's a part of it, but I felt like Ron Perlman's was a little cleaner, right? Even like physically, Ron Perlman looked more polished and everything else, where David Harbour looks like a demon from hell, right? Like he legitimately does. So I think they were legitimately going for just a darker, more vicious, visceral version of Hellboy than the Del Toro movies. I think that's where they tried to separate themselves. There's a couple of sequences, like there's a sequence with like a Baba Yaga, kind of this like witch that's not the main witch. That's pretty dope. Like it's a fight sequence wise, it was pretty slick and pretty inventive. That's kind of where all the goodwill of this movie begins and ends. The rest of it is just an utter mess. Now, there was a number of things about like behind the scenes stuff that was going on between the director and the producer, and that kind of shows up on screen pretty prominently. It is incredibly long. It is 2 hours long, which for me feels about a good 30 to 40 minutes too long. This could have been a tight hour and 20, hour and 30 minutes, and it would have, I think, worked a lot better. 2 hours felt like a slog in a lot of ways. I kind of found myself in the middle of the movie just kind of like zoning out, right? Like it just wasn't enough meat on the bone to kind of keep me super interested, because it's a really basic story, right? Witch dies because she's terrible. She comes back to life. There's a hero. Stop witch, right? Like it's not that heavily complicated of a plot. There are no real subplots. There's just an A story. So it should not, in my opinion, have taken 2 hours. Also, it's Hellboy. So like, relax. This doesn't need to be a tour de force. That being said, the writing is not great. It's serviceable and okay at best a lot of the times. Again, I thought Harbour's portrayal was fine given what he had to work with. Ian McShane is a stellar actor, but even some of his lines are just clunky and weird. And it's like he has too much gravitas to be delivering such seemingly trivial lines. Sasha Lane, who is sort of like kind of his right hand man. And I wouldn't say love interest, but they're very, lifelong friends. And there's clearly something there. They don't really dig into that. But she was pretty good, actually. She was fine. I thought they gave her some kind of fun moments and not comedy beats, but give a little bit of levity to some of the like heavier, brutal moments. Daniel Day Kim was fine. He had like kind of a level of like gravitas and like level of importance to his own character, and then his story I thought was kind of interesting. But again, it's not even a B story. It was just like they show up, they tell him, they give you like a little bit about his story. It takes like 2 minutes, and then they kind of get to the business. But yeah, the editing in some parts were a little weird. There's literally a scene in like a big action sequence towards the I guess maybe towards the latter part of the second act, where Daniel Day Kim is literally fighting a bunch of like zombies or what have you, and he's like, "I'm out of bullets," and then they cut to Hellboy doing something, and then they cut back to that scene, and he's just shooting the whole time. I was like, wait, like, is he out of bullets or is he not? But that was clearly like things had been cut so many times that they just didn't even pay attention to the line versus what was happening in the movie. So that was just kind of bizarre. But there was, I wouldn't say too many, like the director apparently didn't have final edit rights, and maybe that was a good thing, maybe not, because it seemed to drag on and on and on. Like I looked at my watch, I was like, Jesus, there's 45 minutes left in this movie. Why? So all in all, Hellboy reboot, it's not bad because it's a reboot. It's bad because it didn't get edited properly, and they couldn't sort of stick to a tight narrative. They tried to do too much, I think, but it's not bad simply because it's a reboot, because I'm sure people will say that. I have seen some people refer to this as the worst comic book movie ever. I feel like you don't really watch comic book movies, because there are plenty of comic book movies that are worse than this. Hardly the best, hardly the worst. It's a 1.5 out of 5 for me. I would never see it again. The Del Toro movies are clearly superior. If you really are a huge Hellboy fan, then maybe you want to see just to see it just out of curiosity. But all in all, I don't think you really need to see it. I think it's a complete wait till it comes out on whatever streaming platforms you have. At best, I wouldn't rush out to see it. That's it. 1.5 out of 5, and I'll see you guys next time.
You're watching the Nerdpocalypse YouTube channel. Make sure you click that button to subscribe and check out our weekly podcast where we talk about movie, TV, news, tech, and weird stories from around the internet.